My son stopped talking to his imaginary friend for months after my nephew, who was 15, took his own life. My son, who was not quite 5, was the apple of his eye. My nephew treated my son like a little brother, and since his mom watched my son while I worked, they spent lots of time together. I had simply told my son his cousin was sick from sadness and he had died. I would remind him every time before we went to their house so he wouldn't pester my sister about where he was. One day he said, "Mom, you keep saying he's not here anymore, but he is. He sits on my bed before I go to sleep and talks to me." He would not be dissuaded. This went on for months. He knew things we did not speak about around him that had happened. My nephew's grandpa, on his dad's side, passed a few months later. That's when my son told me his cousin told him he wouldn't be able to visit anymore. He was going on a train with his grandpa, and he couldn't come back again. Last thing he told him was to never play with guns. They weren't safe. My nephew took his life with a handgun. Wigged me the hell out. My oldest, when she was 4, had an imaginary friend named Jack who lived under our back porch, and he liked to shove sticks down people's throat. I discouraged playtime with Jack. My son had this imaginary friend, Ganga. She lived in the nearby pond, had duck feet, hair all over her face, ate through a slit in her neck, and we were expecting her any minute for dinner. He was totally chill with this horrific monster idea, yet he had recurring nightmares about a puppy coming into his room. Kids are weird. When my daughter was a toddler, she randomly started talking about a man named Don. She always described him the same way and didn't seem scared at all, despite bringing him up every day. She didn't go to daycare, and we didn't know anyone named Don. Then one day, she got completely freaked out. Wouldn't walk around the house alone in case she ran into Don. Wouldn't sleep in her own room. Talk about how she hated him because he said mean words to her all the time. About a year into Mean Don, we bought a new house. Once we moved, she never spoke of him again. My cousin was a few years younger than me. He had an imaginary friend named Mookie. Mookie wasn't human, but some kind of alien monster thing. It used to freak me out when I'd hear a noise behind me at my grandparents' house, and my cousin would calmly say, "It's only Mookie. He just wants to see you." My cousin had an imaginary friend who she said used to live in the fireplace and was red and patchy, as if she was burnt. Apparently she was a little girl who wore funny clothes that looked like olden day clothes. Still spooks me out. My son was 2 to 3 and always had a bunch of imaginary friends. The most frequently mentioned were Monkey Boy and the Cowboy. When my son was 2, he woke up one night screaming. I ran into his room and he was terrified. He kept pointing at the corner and saying, "The Monkey Boy was bad." I ended up picking my son up and putting him in bed to sleep with me. The next time he was 3, we were taking a walk with his younger sister in the stroller. I'm pushing the stroller and he's walking just behind me. He keeps saying, "Ow, stop it," or "Please stop." I keep looking behind me and see nothing. I stop and ask him what's hurting him. He says, "The cowboy's hurting me, Mommy." I tell him there's no cowboy by us. He says, "Yes, there is. It's the cowboy in my head." Kids are creepy sometimes. My youngest niece had an imaginary friend, and when my sister told me about it, she said, "Ask her what she looks like." Okay. What's she look like? Broken pieces. Oh, why is she broken, sweetie? She fell from our tree. When I was laying in bed late at night, Trying to go to sleep, I extended my arm off the bed and started waving it back and forth. Whenever I passed a certain point, I'd feel something brush my skin, so I'd stop to feel what it was. It felt like a whole head of hair. I got up straight away and turned on the lights. See, there was nothing there. Still freaks me out to this day. Granted, my sister's imaginary friend was kind of a boogeyman type thing and did a few creepy things, but the most memorable was when she was somehow able to predict a power outage through him in time for us to get out of the creepy basement. So that's nice, I guess. A friend of mine told me they ran my imaginary friend Jim over. He continued to be in a wheelchair afterwards. I remember telling my mom my imaginary friend lived in the walls and collected skulls. Also, she had 5 faces and erased people's memories for fun. When I was really young, I used to believe there were secret doors in all the walls where people's imaginary friends lived. I was somewhat a strange child. My 3-year-old son told me a boy was living in his bedroom wall and that he was burning in a fire. He talked about that boy for a year till we moved, then he never mentioned him again. My granddaughter told her mom she needed another chocolate milk for Brenda. Brenda likes tea, but will drink chocolate milk. Brenda, my mom, died February 24th, 2015. Alice was born February 23rd, 2016, and she loved tea. My nephew used to talk about his imaginary friend all the time. He drew pictures of the two of them playing and going on adventures. Then one day my nephew asked me for some money. I asked why, and he said it was for his imaginary friend. Amused, I asked how much. My nephew said, I need about $3.50. And then I looked at one of his drawings and realized his imaginary friend was a crustacean from the Paleolithic area. I said, you tell that goddamn Loch Ness monster to get his own money. My daughter told me her imaginary friend had drowned. The tall man says hi, but don't worry, he's going to come out and play with you later. My mom says 5-year-old me will look down from my top bunk saying, don't make me jump. She heard me from the hall. It was an empty room. Me, my boss, and a coworker were standing at a surface table measuring something when the quarter-ton table moved about 6 inches at one corner across the concrete floor with a loud screech, like someone had grabbed it and moved it out of the way. We just looked at each other, like, did that just happen? My friend had a doctor's appointment and took his dad with him. It was in another town about an hour away, and since the appointment was for 11 a.m., they left at 9:30 to give themselves plenty of time. They pulled into the parking lot at 10:30. My friend said he remembered checking the clock in the car when they arrived and remarking to his dad that they made good time. They went into the office and the receptionist pointed out they were a little late. It was okay because the doctor was running behind. My friend told her that he had an 11 o'clock appointment, that he was actually a half hour early. She pointed to the clock in the waiting room, which said 11:15. His dad checked his watch, 11:15. My friend ran out and checked the clock in the car, 11:15. Somehow, in a few dozen steps from the car to the office, they lost 45 minutes. When they got home, my friend's mom verified that they left at 9:30. There hadn't been any heavy traffic or delays of any kind. Still a mystery to this day. I work for a funeral company. One afternoon, I did a viewing for a man who was having his funeral the next day. Usually at the end of the day, we put the bodies back in the fridge, but because we've been really busy, I was at a small branch. We only had a very small bridge, and it was already full. So on the rare occasion, if they've already been embalmed, we'll leave them in the chapel with the air conditioner cranked up, because we have good security systems, and who wants to break into a funeral home anyway? So the next morning, I'm the first one in, and I walk into the chapel, and the man is out of his coffin, laying face down on the floor, not sprawled, but perfectly neat, like he floated up out of his coffin, turned face down, floated down to the ground. Obviously, I had a heart attack. My first thought was someone had broken in and done this, or were staff members playing a prank? A very sackable prank, and I can't imagine any of our staff doing that for any reason. And what's more is we have security cameras and motion detectors and swipe cards so you can see who has come and gone, but there was nothing. According to security, no one came in or left that night. Fortunately, we don't have security cameras in the chapel. And if you're thinking the guy wasn't really dead, not a third world country, he was dead. He had been embalmed. You don't tend to survive an embalming. So yeah, it was a massive investigation, and no one could explain how he ended up like that. Still gives me the creeps every time I go in there. I saw a guy accidentally drop 16-inch concrete drill bit from shoulder height. It never hit the ground. It was like it stopped existing on its way to the floor. No sound of it hitting the floor, nowhere to go, just gone. 3 witnesses all saw the same thing. This happened in a completely empty, newly constructed building. Hallway was tiled, walls were cinder block, newly installed drop ceiling. We had to fill out a missing tool report, got written up for it, had to search the entire building, top to bottom, for hours. I'm a very skeptical person. I can't come up with any reasonable explanation for it. Still think about it when questions like this come up. Sometimes things just disappear, I guess. When I was about 15, I was home alone in my house at night. It was just me and my 3 dogs. My dogs were normally very lazy at night. They would just lay in their bed, dogs, chilling out until bedtime. But for some reason on this night, they all became very agitated at the same time. They kept running into different rooms in my house and growled and barked at empty corners. Something that they've never done before or since. I checked the whole house and never found anything. I don't believe in anything supernatural, but that night I slept in my parents' room with the door locked, a gun next to me, and 3 dogs on the bed with me. My family was sitting on a back porch watching a thunderstorm. My older brother grabbed a toy gun out of my hand and said, "Watch this." He pointed the gun at a tree in the backyard and pulled the trigger. As the toy gun popped, lightning struck the tree he was aiming at and the tree fell over. He handed me the toy gun back with a smile and walked away. My parents witnessed this event as well. It was one hell of a coincidence. But damn, was his smile creepy, like he knew it was going to happen. One night last year, I was taking a shower before bed. The glass in the shower door shattered, leaving shards everywhere, and with me some cuts. No way to get out of the shower without cutting the soles of my feet badly. Luckily, my wife heard and helped me out. Shattering glass is explainable. The door was hanging off the track for months. Must have been pressure on the glass and eventually it got too much. My own fault. In the hour and a half spent cleaning the glass, I realized there was some weird foreshadowing of this event. Earlier in the evening, I was putting my son to bed. He was 5 at the time, and out of nowhere, he asked, "Daddy, what are shards?" Earlier that week, I was discussing music with some friends, and we were talking about the Eurythmics. With that in mind, I was watching some of their music videos that night. About 20 minutes before the glass in the shower door shattered, before my wife had to bring me my slippers so I could walk over the shards of glass without slicing my feet, I was watching the video for Annie Lexus's Walking on Broken Glass. I spent a lot of time in the woods and hiking. I do not believe in Bigfoot or any unexplained wild animals. In the moment, though, I fully understand why those stories exist. I was hiking in Georgia off the Appalachian Trail. It was one of those foggy mornings, so foggy in fact, when I first was hiking, I ran into a flock of wild turkeys, which simply does not happen. They were so close, in fact, I could have touched them with my walking sticks until they took off into the fog. 15 minutes later, I heard a growl that sounded like it came from the devil himself. It growled 2 to 3 times, kind of sounded like a monkey, but way too deep. I have looked over the internet to see if I could recognize the sound. I cannot. Caught me off guard. I positioned myself between a tree and the sound, using my walking stick like a spear and a tree like a shield in case it attacked me. I started shouting like you're supposed to, especially if it's a black bear, which really does work. In the moment, I believe every scary story you hear from around the campfire. Luckily, I heard whatever run off. To this day, the logical side of my head knows it was nothing abnormal, but in that moment, it was effing Bigfoot. If it was 1975, I could totally see me going down that rabbit hole and taking the time I heard Bigfoot on a morning fog. In college, I worked at a pizza place. I worked mornings alone for about a year, only person in the store. I felt the presence of a male spirit who liked to watch me work. He gradually got closer as weeks went by, and I had to tell him to stay back. He complied, and I never felt threatened. One night during a busy rush, I saw him in the back of the crowded restaurant. He was this old man wearing jeans and a button-up denim shirt, invisible from the knees down. He looked super surprised I spotted him. Lots of other stuff at the same pizza place. Noises in the dining room, like crowded party before opening. Go to check it out and the noise stops. Sounds of metal pans falling, but no pans on the floor. A waitress refused to clean the bathrooms without an escort because she saw a ghost of a boy in one of them. I was not the only one who experienced things, but they didn't like to talk about it much. It never bothered me, though. The ghosts there weren't bad like other places I've been. My sister, mother, and I went for a walk in part of the rural Northern California with deep oak forests. Most of these forests are quite young, only 150 or years old. Most of the trees were cut down for lumber during the gold rush of 1849. Every now and then, as we're on the road, there were beautiful 200-year-old oaks with thick, spidering branches and moss growing in the bark. We were walking beneath one in the gloom of dusk, trees in the silhouette against the ink-dark sky. Suddenly, these things came hopping out of the manzanita bushes ahead. There were 8 of them, ankle high, round like gravestones, bopping along low in the undergrowth. Each one had 2 eyes, taking up the whole head. We all froze as these things filtered up the road. My mother turned on her keychain flashlight. We were face to face with 8 fluffy owlets. One time, when I was walking to my room from the bathroom, I felt the air get suddenly warm. Not cold, like someone or something had just run behind me. There was no one there, but I never turned around to look. When I was 6 or 7, I saw an older woman in a nightgown at the top of the stairs. I said the gray lady as a way to describe her when my parents and my dad flipped out. Apparently, he had also seen this apparition and called her the same name, but only mentioned it to my mom once. My brother and I were asleep. My dad and I were the only ones to see her, but it went on for 2.5 decades until they sold the house. She was always nice to me, would just stare at me, but she used to watch my dad from their bedroom door and rush at him screaming during the night. They started sleeping with the door shut. I've also seen my childhood dog many times in our old house before my parents sold it. My mom refuses to go to the basement because she thinks it's haunted, either by someone or by wolves, as she calls it. So I have to go do the laundry every time. I've had a few things happen, like a shadow moving at the corner of my eye, or even when I saw a face in the dark. The worst was a few weeks ago, when I was going to grab a wine bottle from the cellar, even deeper in the basement, and I hear something walking next to me in the dark. Not human footsteps, like a dog walking, because I could clearly hear claws making high-pitched sounds against the ground. It really sounded like a dog was walking towards me. I bolted out, and it hasn't happened again. Yet. When I was 6 or 7, I saw an older woman in a nightgown at the top of the stairs. RA ghost in college. We were told there was a ghost of an RA who died in our building. We had one drinking fountain for our floor in the middle. I wake up and go get a drink around 2:30 a.m. with 3 o'clock a.m. I hear the door to the stairwell around the corner open and close. I hear what sounded like someone walking my way wearing athletic sport pants. You know, the kind that make a noise when you walk. There is no one, yet the sound walks past me and out towards the double doors that move the tiniest bit when the sound gets there. I don't drink, I don't do drugs, and I know I wasn't asleep. Yet for some reason I was like, must have been the ghost RA checking all as well. I was way too calm about it. I saw ghost soldiers marching across my yard one night. The chupacabra was in the backyard of my house at 1 in the morning in 1995 in the countryside in Puerto Rico. It was terrifying, the noise he made and the footsteps on the grass.
And more terrifying was listening to all the altered animals as if they felt it too. In the morning, when I got to school, my teacher called me aside to ask me if I felt something strange around my house that night. I explained everything to him. My neighbor from the front was a teacher at the same school. She had felt everything. She had told her classmates everything. My teacher told me, the chupacabra was at your house last night. A few days before that happened, something happened to my neighbor. Something opened his chicken coop and killed all his chickens. Strange thing is, there were footprints. Same footprints that the investigators said were from the chupacabra. I work at Tim Hortons at 2:30 every morning, and anytime I go in the freezer to get more food, it sounds like people are running around in the walls. At first it didn't bother me, but it got worse and worse until I'd go in and it sounded like people were banging on the walls or hitting them with something. It's pretty creepy, especially when I'm alone in the dark store. I was once at an IHOP late, and one other person was sitting at a 6-person table eating 9 different pies at once. The waiter just kept bringing pies. I used to be a 000 operator, Australian version of 911. I received a call one night around 2 a.m. from a very freaked out teenager reporting that he and his friends were having a bonfire and drinking at an abandoned mental institution out there in the middle of nowhere, and now one of his friends had disappeared. He couldn't even tell me the location that his friend had driven out there. I initially thought it was a prank, but it turned out to be legit. Creepy crap. Took me ages to even work out where they were. I think the teenager turned up eventually. I distinctly heard someone whistling "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot" while installing projectors in an office building in the middle of the night. Nothing else ever happened, but I can't explain that. A large shopping mall, which is equally creepy as quiet. We have one part of the mall, long wide corridor, leading to some behind the scenes areas. And pretty much all the staff refuse to work in alone. You can hear footsteps on the concrete stairs that lead down a few floors into the car park, tapping and banging on the glass panels along the corridor. There's nothing on the other side of them. The automatic doors swing open at random with nobody nearby. A lot of us have seen figures out of the corner of our eyes. Granted, this is early hours in the morning, so it might be explainable by tiredness. The heavy fire doors rattle as if someone's trying to heave them open, but just can't quite do it. Lots of strange stuff, and the atmosphere is always unwelcoming. When I was a teenager, I used to work as a cinema usher. There was a show on Screen 4 starting at 3 a.m. every Friday. So this one time during the show, I entered the washroom and a man wearing a black overcoat and hat only was eating urinal cakes. He turns around and extends his hand and says, "You want to try some?" I used to work nights in a wood cabin with windows that looked onto a concrete area that the cabin was set into. Around it was nothing but glass and a huge locked perimeter fence and gate. One night my coworker and I heard footsteps crossing the concrete area. Looked out to where the lights were shining, and nothing there, but the footsteps kept coming to the door. We were both terrified in the case the door opened. Then the footsteps stopped, like someone had just stepped onto the grass at the edge of the concrete. Still nobody there. Then a couple minutes later, time it would have taken someone to walk over to the mini zoo in the compound, all the animals went berserk. 2 a.m., I hear a noise at the front door, but the Ring camera didn't ding like it recognizes the person is there. Check the camera for some old homeless dude just standing there for a good 2 minutes, and he just turns and walks away. The camera never detected a person. Effing whack. My neighbor uses our property to rehab rescue horses. One horse they brought in was Harvey. Harvey was missing half of his face. He was beautiful, big, Morgan stud horse that had an untreated abscess that caused the skin on the right side of his head to rot away. He was still perfectly functional. Friendly horse, though. The day I met Harvey, I was asleep in my room on a breezy spring day, and he got through the fence and curiously stuck his head through my window to nibble on my blanket. I woke up to a faceless black demon horse trying to eat my feet. I screamed. He spooked and yanked my whole window out. I damn near had a heart attack.
Something reminiscent of Slender Man. Obviously, Slender Man is a creepypasta, but this isn't Slender Man. There's a farm behind my house, separated by a canal. The farm stretches maybe 1,000 feet back before it hits a tree line. A couple weeks ago, I was eating dinner and was staring out the farm. It was 20 minutes until nightfall. I saw what looked like a really tall gray version of Gumby walk out of the tree line, take 2 really large lunges, then disappear back into the tree line. It was much too tall to be a person. The next night, at the same time, the same exact thing happened, except my parents were with me. I asked them if they saw that, and they just said, "Saw what?" Then it happened again the third night. So either my body is giving me random hallucinations in sync with my body's time clock, or there's some weird, slender Gumby demon living in the farm behind my house. Haven't been home much recently, so I haven't been able to look for it. But if I'm able to, I'm going to try to take a picture. I don't know how well that'll work given the distance I could see it, but I can try. I was on a Cub Scout campout somewhere in the woods by Knob Noster, Missouri. My friends were back at camp, and I was in the woods by the campsite. There was this fallen tree that was angled, so we spent most of the campout trying to climb it. So I was halfway up the tree, and I looked to my right, and a large, hairy, orangutan-looking creature was looking at me grinning. I was 7 years old, not on drugs, and I saw an honest-to-God Sasquatch. I was in my brother's room a few years ago when something strange happened with a balloon. My brother had a red balloon in his room, don't know where he got it from. I was just hanging out in there with my mom. My brother was on his bed, while I was sitting in a chair, and I was standing near the door. Now, this red balloon was 4 feet away from me, pushed up against the ceiling. I was looking in the balloon's direction, and all of a sudden, it just falls halfway to the ground and shoots back up again. Everyone assumed saw it and freaked out and sprinted back into my room, terrified. My brother was going crazy while I freaked the hell out once, and my mom was trying to calm us back. No one was in arm's reach of the balloon or string, and it suddenly fell down and shot back up again. I was around 12 when this happened to me. During the time, my brother and I shared a room, and we had bunk beds. He had the top bunk while I had the bottom. The room was quite long, but really skinny, almost an L shape, if you will. Anyways, I remember waking up late one night. At the time, I could not figure out what I was feeling, but now I could describe it as dread and extreme anxiety. I stood up out of bed, checked to see my brother sleeping. As I turned toward the doorway, I noticed it was open. It was odd because we always slept with the door closed to keep the cat out. As I walked towards the door to shut it, I could only see a shadow in the doorway that was illuminated by the hallway nightlight my dad set up for us. I peeked around the corner, and that's when I saw it. Whatever it was I saw. In the doorway was a massive figure. If I had to guess, probably around 6'6", 6'7", extremely lanky. The only detail I could make out was the long skinny arms and its eyes, which were red. I remember staring at it for a couple seconds before it entered the room, having to bend at the waist just to get underneath the doorframe. The last thing I remember was it repeatedly approaching the bunk bed. Then it goes blank. I woke up on the floor early the next morning. Told my dad about it the next day, but of course he chalked it up to being a bad dream, and realistically, he was probably right. It's just difficult to get over the fact this is the day I still remember whatever it was in the doorway and the exact feeling I had from start to finish. The final thing about the encounter that convinced me something happened that night was my brother. About 2 days later, he pulled off his shirt and he had what looked like 3 insect bite marks on his upper right back, forming a triangle. They went away relatively fast, but to this day, he has a mole in the direct center of where the bites were. My mom's Aboriginal, and as a kid, whenever we moved to a new place, she'd always get to know all the black fellas in town. We made friends with a family who had an old uncle. Uncle Jack used to spend a lot of time in the bush, and he was fluent in the Noongar language. He told us lots of yarns about little hairy humanoids called wood archies. They're well known among Noongar people
and are mischievous and can torment you if you piss them off. He told us one story that gave me chills as a kid. He was camping in his swag, and his fire had died right down. He woke up, and there were 4 wood archies surrounding him, standing at his head, feet, and either side, like the points of a compass. He was too scared to move, so he stayed stock still, trying not to look at them. At some point, he drifted to sleep, and when he awoke, they were gone. They left a handful of rocks on his swag, though. This is on the behalf of my mother, who passed away a year ago and saw and heard many things the average person wouldn't believe. To start, I live on a farm in a house that was built in the early 1900s. To date, 4 people have passed away in the house or near the house. My great-great-grandma died in a rocking chair. My great-great-grandpa was riding in a wagon down our driveway when his team of horses got spooked and he flew off and broke his neck. A hired man's wife fell down our stairs while she was pregnant and hemorrhaged and died. And my aunt died in my old bedroom at age 2. Over the years, my mother and brother have experienced many different spooky things on our property. In the early 1980s, they both heard footsteps walking up and down our stairs in the middle of the night. My brother was alone once, and he was outside doing farm chores in the dark. He was maybe 500 feet from our house. He had the urge to look over, and every single light in the house was on. My mom has heard people whispering her name. She's heard creaking noises in the house and sounds if something had fallen. My father had been oblivious to everything and never heard any of it. In 2004, my mom went outside to fill our wood stove at about 10 p.m. On her way back to the house, she got the feeling that she was being watched. She turned to look at her right. She saw a very skinny, gray being standing below our house, staring over his shoulder at her. She got an intense feeling and wanted her to see it. After a few seconds, it bolted away from the house. She was so freaked out, she sprinted into our house, locked the doors, and collapsed on the floor in hysterics. For years, she never told anybody the story. This was a particularly interesting experience, as in the late 1960s, our neighbor just over the hill had gray aliens walk into his barn and actually talk to him. It was investigated by some big shot UFO investigator out of Chicago, too. I personally never have seen anything in our house until recently. Over the years, friends have came over and saw shadow people in our house or heard the pitter-patter of dog feet on the floor steps. As I said earlier, my mother passed away a year ago, and we've been sitting at a table downstairs just below the bedroom. For about 3 months, every night I was at home alone, I would hear this pounding noise every 30 seconds coming from somewhere in the walls as I tried to fall asleep. I heard crashing noises, and my dog perked up his ears because of them. A lot of people are too freaked out to stay overnight without my dad being there. And I'm starting to get that way too. When I was in college, I lived in a dorm for native students. It was my first multicultural house in the Greek village, and we were so proud. About 9 of us lived there. The college was built on our tribe's old wintering grounds, and the school had disposed of things pretty shady way back in the 70s and 80s. Anyway, over the first few months we lived there, several of us noticed some strange things. We weren't comfortable by ourselves. We'd see black people shapes out of the corner of our eyes. Somebody even swore they had a conversation with me when I wasn't even in the house. They said the me was a bit off and vacant and strange, but they couldn't figure out why. This happened to a few of us. Things were being broken and misplaced. We would hear strange wind noises sometimes. We finally went to someone in our tribe who dealt with things like this. He came and cleared the house with tobacco and water. We prayed and cleansed ourselves. 2 of us stayed in the house while he worked. I distinctly remember him walking through the darkened living room, opening the door, and hearing what sounded like a tornado whiz through the room very quickly. Then it was over. Turns out it wasn't malevolent or anything, just something that had attached itself to the land. We never had any problems after the cleansing. Went on a high school trip to Civil War sites. Went around Gettysburg in the middle of the night. Saw 3 shadowy looking dudes with muskets go running by. I was a baby when this incident happened, but I believe my sister, who was around 5 years old at the time. My cousins, aunts, and uncles were at a birthday party one Saturday at my grandmother's house in Houston. All the adults were inside the house around dusk, but the older cousins, ages ranging from 4 to 8, and my sisters were outside playing. My sister isn't sure who noticed the bird in the tree first, but soon all the cousins noticed it as well. A bird was perched on one of the lower branches just staring at them. Before their horrified eyes, the bird began transforming until it was a woman sitting on the branch, leering at them. As they began shouting and screaming for their parents, the woman became a bird again. By this time, the parents had come out to investigate the commotion, but the bird wouldn't budge. Not until my grandmother, a formidable and salt-of-the-earth type woman, went outside did the bird fly off. The house is creepy, still in the family, and I've had other strange experiences, as did my mother. My cousin owns it now, and it's still creepy and old, and he doesn't really like living in the little yellow house either. In the beautiful roses my grandmother planted, strange things have been found. Animal bones, guts, melted candles, and other witchcraft type things. A lady in white has been seen moving from room to room in the past by house guests.
Alligators. A young woman in town married a man from another part of the country. He was a nice fellow, and they got along pretty well together. There was only one problem. Every night he'd go swimming in the river. Sometimes he'd be gone all night long, and she'd complain about how lonely she was. This couple had 2 sons. As soon as the boys could walk, their father began to teach them how to swim. And when they got to be old enough, he took them swimming in the river at night. Often they would stay there all night long. The young woman would stay home all by herself. After a while, she began to act in a strange way. At least that's what the neighbors said. She told them that her husband was turning into an alligator and that he was trying to turn the boys into alligators. Everybody told her there was nothing wrong with a man taking his son swimming. That was a natural thing to do. And when it came to alligators, there just weren't any nearby. Everybody knew that. Early one morning, the young woman came running into town from the direction of the river. She was soaking wet. She said a big alligator and 2 little alligators had pulled her in and had tried to get her to eat a raw fish. They were her husband and her sons, she said. They wanted her to live with them, but she had gotten away. Her doctor decided she had lost her mind, and he had her put in a hospital for a while. After that, nobody saw her husband and boys again. They just disappeared. But now and then, a fisherman would tell us about seeing alligators in the river at night. Usually it was 1 big alligator and 2 small ones, but people said they were just making it up. Everybody knows there aren't any alligators around here.
Hey, I'm Connor from Bigfoot Anon, and I'm always on the hunt for the next big adventure. When you're on the trail for long hours, you build up quite the stench, enough to drive any skunk ape or yeti away. Luckily, I'm on the quest now for the solution to all my problems. Yeti bars. They do exist. Available in tons of different scents and fragrances. Check out YetiBars.net for more and use my code BA10 for a special offer. Clean like a beast. Yeti Bars!